a journey through Irish history, from ancient beginnings to modern Ireland. Hello everyone, and welcome to another captivating journey through time. Today, we're exploring the rich and complex history of Ireland, a tale spanning thousands of years, from ancient megalithic monuments to a vibrant modern republic. Ireland's story is one of resilience and cultural persistence, shaped by invasions and settlements, religious transformations, colonial oppression, and a powerful national revival. So, let's dive into this remarkable journey through the ages of the Emerald Isle. Prehistoric Ireland. Our story begins around 8000 BCE, when the first hunter-gatherers arrived in Ireland after the last ice age. These early inhabitants found a heavily forested island, teeming with wildlife but devoid of many animal species common elsewhere in Europe. Interestingly, Ireland has never been home to native snakes. The legend of St. Patrick driving them out explains mythologically what was already a biological fact. By about 4000 BCE, Neolithic farmers had begun to transform the Irish landscape, clearing forests and establishing agricultural communities. These settlers created some of Ireland's most impressive prehistoric monuments. Newgrange, built around 3200 BCE, predates Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. This massive passage tomb is aligned so that at the winter solstice, the rising sun illuminates its inner chamber, demonstrating the astronomical knowledge of its builders. Similar structures at nearby Knowth and Douth, along with hundreds of stone circles, standing stones, and burial mounds across the island, bear witness to a sophisticated prehistoric society. The Bronze Age, 2500–500 BCE, brought technological advances and new peoples to Ireland. Archaeological findings suggest extensive trade networks with continental Europe, with Ireland becoming known for its gold work. The Sade Fields in County Mayo, the world's oldest known field systems, date from this period, showing organized land management on a large scale. The Iron Age in Ireland, 500 BCE, 400 CE, is associated with Celtic culture. Though the popular image of the Celts arriving in a massive invasion is oversimplified, Celtic language, art, and social structures certainly came to dominate Ireland during this period. Irish society was organized into a hierarchy of about 150 small kingdoms, tuatha, with high kings claiming overlordship at regional and occasionally national levels. The famous Hill of Tara in County Meath served as a ceremonial and political center, where high kings were inaugurated. Early Christian Ireland. Christianity arrived in Ireland in the 5th century CE, traditionally associated with St. Patrick, though he was certainly not the first Christian missionary to reach Irish shores. Patrick, a Romano-British youth captured by Irish raiders and enslaved before escaping and later returning as a missionary, became Ireland's patron saint. While he didn't literally drive out snakes or use the shamrock to explain the Trinity, these are later legends, his impact was profound. The conversion to Christianity in Ireland was remarkably peaceful compared to many other regions of Europe. Rather than destroying pagan sites, Christians often incorporated them into new religious practices. The Irish developed a distinctive form of Christianity that preserved much of the native culture while embracing the new faith. The period from the 6th to 9th centuries is often called Ireland's Golden Age. The island became a center of learning and artistic achievement, while much of Western Europe struggled through the Dark Ages after Rome's fall. Monasteries like Clonmacnoise, Glendalough, and Durrow became intellectual powerhouses, where monks preserved classical knowledge and created masterpieces of art like the Book of Kells, an illuminated manuscript of the Gospels that represents one of the pinnacles of medieval European art. Irish monasteries also sent missionaries throughout Europe, establishing monasteries in Scotland, England, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. Scholars like Columbanus and Columba spread Irish learning and religious practices, helping to reinvigorate European intellectual life. The distinctive high crosses that still dot the Irish landscape, with their elaborate biblical carvings, exemplify the artistic achievements of this period. Viking Age and Norman Ireland. Ireland's Golden Age was disrupted by Viking invasions beginning in the late 8th century. Norse raiders attacked monasteries for their wealth, as these religious centers had become repositories for precious items. The Vikings initially came to plunder, but eventually established settlements, particularly along the coast. Dublin, Ireland's capital was founded by Vikings as a trading port around 841 CE. Despite their initial destructiveness, Vikings ultimately became integrated into Irish society through intermarriage and adoption of local customs. They enhanced Ireland's trading connections and founded or developed several major towns, including Dublin, Wexford, Waterford, Cork, and Limerick. Their influence remains visible in Irish place names and genetic heritage. The 12th century brought a new wave of invaders. In 1169, Anglo-Norman knights from Wales landed in Ireland at the invitation of Diarmait mac Murchada, a Leinster king who sought help in regaining his kingdom. What was intended as limited assistance became a major invasion when Richard de Clare, Strongbow, decided to establish his own power base. Concerned by the growing independent power of his nobles, King Henry II of England arrived in 1171, asserting his authority and becoming Lord of Ireland. The Norman invasion began centuries of English involvement in Ireland. The newcomers built impressive stone castles, established towns, and introduced feudal systems of landholding. Initially controlling much of the eastern and southern coastal areas, the Pale, Norman power eventually extended over much of the island. However, over generations, many Norman families became more Irish than the Irish themselves, adopting Irish customs, language, and identities, a process known as Gaelicization, medieval Ireland, and Tudor Conquest. By the late medieval period, English control had receded significantly, limited largely to the area around Dublin known as the Pale. Gaelic Irish customs and laws regained prominence in much of the country, while the descendants of the Normans, now called the Old English, maintained an identity distinct from both the native Irish and the English authorities. This situation changed dramatically during the Tudor period of English history, 1485–1603. Henry VIII's break with Rome and establishment of the Protestant Church of England created a new religious dimension to the English-Irish relationship. While Henry VIII simply declared himself head of the church in Ireland as well as England, his daughter Elizabeth I pursued more aggressive policies of Anglicization and colonization. The Tudor conquest of Ireland was completed through a series of brutally effective military campaigns, particularly during the 9 Years' War, 1593–1603, against Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone. English forces under Lord Mountjoy used scorched earth tactics, creating artificial famines that devastated the Irish population. O'Neill's defeat at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601 marked the effective end of the Old Gaelic order. The conquest's most significant aftermath came in 1607 with the flight of the Earls, when O'Neill and other Gaelic aristocrats left Ireland for continental Europe. Their departure removed the traditional leadership of Gaelic society and created a vacuum that the English government filled through the Ulster Plantation, a colonization scheme that brought thousands of Protestant settlers from England and Scotland to confiscated lands in Ulster. Plantations and religious conflict. The 17th century was one of the most traumatic in Irish history. The plantation policy extended beyond Ulster, with large-scale confiscations of Catholic-owned land throughout the island. These plantations altered Ireland's demographic, religious, and cultural landscape, creating deep divisions that would persist for centuries. Religious and political conflicts in Britain inevitably spilled over into Ireland. When the English Civil War broke out in 1642, Ireland experienced its own devastating conflict. The Irish Confederate War saw Catholics, Royalists, Parliamentarians, and Scottish Covenanters fighting in shifting alliances. The arrival of Oliver Cromwell in 1649 brought a particularly brutal chapter, with massacres at Drogheda and Wexford, and further massive land confiscations. The Williamite War of 1689–1691, part of the broader European conflict between King James II and William of Orange, resulted in another Catholic defeat. The Treaty of Limerick, which ended the war, promised some religious tolerance, but these terms were quickly broken. Instead, the Protestant-controlled Irish Parliament in Dublin enacted the penal laws, a series of statutes that severely restricted Catholic rights. Catholics were barred from Parliament, the legal profession, the military, and higher education. Catholic landowners faced restrictions on property inheritance, and Catholic clergy were persecuted. During this period, Ireland was governed under the system that became known as the Protestant Ascendancy. A small elite of Anglican landowners controlled the country's political, economic, and social institutions, while the Catholic majority remained marginalized and impoverished. The 18th century and the rise of Irish nationalism. Despite oppression, the 18th century saw important cultural and political developments in Ireland. While Irish Gaelic culture had been severely damaged, it persisted, particularly in rural areas and through traditions of poetry and music. Meanwhile, Anglo-Irish writers like Jonathan Swift, Oliver Goldsmith, and Richard Brinsley Sheridan made significant contributions to English literature. Dublin developed as a major city with elegant Georgian architecture, while landed gentry built impressive country houses. However, this prosperity primarily benefited the Protestant minority, with the Catholic peasantry often living in extreme poverty as tenant farmers. Political consciousness began to evolve among different segments of Irish society. The American and French revolutions inspired ideas of republicanism and democratic rights. The Society of United Irishmen, founded in 1791 by Presbyterians in Belfast, initially sought parliamentary reform but eventually embraced revolutionary republicanism, seeking to unite Catholic, Protestant, and dissenter under the common name of Irishmen. Under Wolfe Tone's leadership, the United Irishmen launched a rebellion in 1798, with French support. Though ultimately unsuccessful and brutally suppressed, the rebellion represented a new phase in Irish nationalism, one that transcended religious divisions and embraced republican ideals. The British government's response to the 1798 rebellion was the Act of Union, which took effect on January 1, 1801. Abolishing the Irish Parliament and incorporating Ireland directly into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. While promised Catholic emancipation, the right for Catholics to sit in Parliament, was delayed until 1829, when Daniel O'Connell's mass movement forced the British government to concede. The Great Famine and its aftermath. The defining catastrophe of 19th century Ireland was undoubtedly the Great Famine, An Gorta Mór, of 1845-1852. When a potato blight destroyed the staple food of the Irish peasantry, the result was mass starvation and disease. Approximately 1 million people died and another million emigrated, reducing Ireland's population by about 25%. The British government's response to the famine has been a source of historical controversy. While some relief measures were implemented, many historians argue they were inadequate, hampered by laissez-faire economic ideology and anti-Irish prejudice. Food continued to be exported from Ireland throughout the famine, and evictions of starving tenants accelerated the death toll. The famine transformed Irish society and demographics. Mass emigration became an established pattern, creating large Irish diaspora communities, particularly in the United States, Canada, Australia, and Britain. By 1901, Ireland's population had fallen to about half its pre-famine level. The famine also intensified anti-British sentiment and contributed to the growth of more radical nationalism. The post-famine period saw important developments in land reform. The Irish Land League, founded by Michael Davitt in 1879 and led by Charles Stewart Parnell, mobilized tenants against unfair rents and evictions, using tactics like boycotting, a term that originated during this campaign. A series of land acts passed by the British Parliament gradually improved tenant rights and ultimately enabled many Irish farmers to purchase their land. Culturally, the late 19th century witnessed a significant Gaelic revival. Organizations like the Gaelic Athletic Association, 1884, promoted traditional Irish sports, while the Gaelic League, 1893, worked to preserve and revitalize the Irish language. These cultural movements helped foster a stronger sense of Irish identity separate from Britain. The road to independence. The question of Irish self-government dominated politics in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Irish Parliamentary Party, under leaders like Charles Stewart Parnell and John Redmond, pursued Home Rule, a measure that would restore a Dublin Parliament while maintaining Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. Home Rule bills were introduced in 1886, 1893, and 1912, with the third finally passing, but then suspended with the outbreak of World War I in 1914. Meanwhile, more radical nationalist movements were developing. Sinn Féin, We Ourselves, was founded in 1905, initially advocating passive resistance to British rule. The Irish Republican Brotherhood, a secret organization committed to establishing an independent Irish republic by force, continued to operate and plan. The crucial turning point came with the Easter Rising of 1916. On Easter Monday, a small group of Republicans seized key locations in Dublin and proclaimed an Irish Republic. The rising was quickly suppressed, and its leaders, including Patrick Pearse and James Connolly, were executed. Initially, public opinion had been largely unsympathetic to the rebels, but the executions transformed them into martyrs and shifted sentiment toward radical nationalism. The 1918 general election resulted in a sweeping victory for Sinn Féin, which refused to take seats at Westminster and instead established its own parliament, Dáil Éireann, declaring Irish independence. The Irish War of Independence, 1919-1921, followed with the Irish Republican Army, IRA, waging a guerrilla campaign against British forces. The Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 ended the conflict, establishing the Irish Free State as a self-governing dominion within the British Empire, similar to Canada or Australia. However, the treaty required an oath of allegiance to the British Crown and partitioned the island, with 6 predominantly Protestant counties in Ulster remaining part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland, Independent Ireland and the Troubles. The treaty deeply divided Irish nationalists. A tragic civil war, 1922-1923, followed between pro-treaty forces led by Michael Collins, who argued the treaty was a stepping stone to full independence, and anti-treaty Republicans led by Éamon de Valera, who rejected any compromise on Irish unity and republic status. The pro-treaty side prevailed, but the conflict left lasting scars on Irish politics. Under successive governments, particularly those led by Éamon de Valera, who eventually accepted constitutional politics, the Irish Free State gradually dismantled links with Britain. The 1937 Constitution renamed the state Ireland, Éire, and removed most references to the British monarchy, while the Republic of Ireland Act 1948 formally declared Ireland a republic and ended membership in the Commonwealth. Early independent Ireland was marked by conservative social policies, economic protectionism, and cultural nationalism. The Catholic Church exercised enormous influence over education, healthcare, and social policy. Economic development was slow, with high emigration continuing as many Irish people sought better opportunities abroad, particularly in Britain and America. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, the Protestant majority maintained political control through a system that disadvantaged the Catholic minority. By the late 1960s, a civil rights movement emerged seeking to address discrimination in housing, employment, and voting rights. Tensions escalated into violence, beginning a period known as the Troubles, 1968-1998. The Troubles saw conflict between Republican paramilitaries, principally the Provisional IRA, seeking union with Ireland, Loyalist paramilitaries defending Northern Ireland's British status, and British security forces. Over 3,500 people were killed during the conflict. The violence occasionally spilled over into the Republic of Ireland and Great Britain with bombing campaigns and assassinations. After decades of violence and failed political initiatives, the peace process gained momentum in the 1990s. The Good Friday Agreement, Belfast Agreement of 1998, established power-sharing institutions in Northern Ireland, created cross-border bodies, and affirmed that Northern Ireland's constitutional status could only change with the consent of its people. While sporadic violence continues from dissident groups, the agreement effectively ended the large-scale conflict. Modern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland underwent dramatic transformation in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Beginning in the 1960s under Séan Lemas's leadership, the country abandoned economic protectionism and opened to international investment. Education expanded and social attitudes began to liberalize. The 1990s brought the Celtic Tiger economic boom, fueled by foreign direct investment, EU membership, joined in 1973, and a young, well-educated workforce. Ireland transformed from one of Western Europe's poorest countries to one of its wealthiest in a single generation. This prosperity brought significant social change, including increased secularization and a decline in the Catholic Church's influence, exacerbated by scandals involving clerical abuse. The 2008 global financial crisis hit Ireland particularly hard, resulting in a severe recession, a banking crisis, and an international bailout. However, the economy eventually recovered, and Ireland has remained attractive to international technology and pharmaceutical companies. Recent years have seen significant social liberalization, symbolized by successful referendums legalizing same-sex marriage, 2015, and repealing the constitutional ban on abortion, 2018. Ireland elected its first gay Taoiseach, Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, in 2017, and has twice elected Michael D. Higgins, a poet and human rights campaigner, as president. Relations between Ireland and the United Kingdom improved dramatically following the Good Friday Agreement, symbolized by Queen Elizabeth II's historic state visit to Ireland in 2011, the first by a British monarch since Irish independence. However, the UK's decision to leave the European Union, Brexit, created new complications, particularly regarding the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Today's Ireland is a modern, diverse, and progressive European nation that maintains its distinctive cultural identity while engaging confidently with the wider world. The Irish language, while spoken as a first language by only a small minority, continues to be supported through education and media. Traditional music, dance, and literature remain vibrant, with contemporary Irish artists gaining international recognition. Conclusion: from ancient megalith builders to Celtic warriors, early Christian scholars to revolutionary republicans, and from an impoverished nation to a modern European success story, Ireland's journey through history reflects extraordinary resilience and cultural persistence. Despite centuries of invasion, colonization, and oppression, the Irish maintained a distinctive identity that has enriched world culture far beyond what might be expected from a small island nation. Ireland's historical experience contains both tragedy and triumph. The trauma of conquest, plantation, famine, and partition exists alongside remarkable achievements in literature, music, scholarship, and peaceful conflict resolution. Understanding this complex history helps us appreciate not just Ireland itself, but also the enormous influence of Irish diaspora communities worldwide. As we've seen throughout this journey, Irish history demonstrates how a nation's past shapes its present, but doesn't determine its future. Modern Ireland has transformed itself while maintaining connections to its rich heritage, creating a synthesis of tradition and innovation that continues to evolve. Thank you for joining me on this historical journey through Irish history. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating stories of our world's past.